I am Jimbo Paris, and you are listening to The Jimbo Paris Show. All right. Hello, everyone. How's it going? This is Jimbo Paris. Welcome back again to The Jimbo Paris Show. So today we have Elliot Schwartz. He's an entrepreneur, growth strategist, visionary, and also an advisor. He is a chief marketer, founder, CEO, and also kind of this big time consultant. And he sort of helps people to sort of grow and sort of improve their livelihoods and their approaches to situations. So let's sit down and let's see what he has to say.
Hi, Jimbo. How are you?
Oh, how are you doing today?
Yeah, all right. It's beginning of winter here in South Africa. I went for a run this morning. It was 3 degrees Celsius, which I think is about 37 Fahrenheit. So it was a bit cool, but I guess that comes with the time of year while you guys are moving into summer.
All right. Fascinating. Fascinating. So
Yeah.
you're from South Africa.
I'm actually American, but I've been living in South Africa full time since 1980. And I was commuting here as a management consulting for several years before that. And then in 1980, the client that I had at the time said, "Why don't you stop commuting? Why don't you come and join us as our marketing director for a couple of years and help implement the strategy that I was involved in developing?" And at the time, the thought of trading in my little studio apartment in Manhattan for a house on the beach in Cape Town sounded like a good idea. And like many people who've moved here over the years, I met and married a South African girl, and I never left.
Okay. Okay. So just to kind of begin here, who are you and what are you about?
All right. I'm a person I think you'll probably conclude has a very short attention span because I have been and am still many different things. As I said, I grew up in the States. As an undergraduate, I went to the University of Chicago, where I majored in economics. In the heyday of people like Milton Friedman and George Stigler, I had a number of professors who went on to win Nobel Prizes. I then stayed on and did an MBA there at what's now called Chicago Booth, and got my MBA before I turned 23 to discover maybe the world really wasn't looking for 22-year-old MBAs. And while I had ideas of things like management consulting, I ended up in retailing, not unwillingly. I was very interested in retailing. I'd done an internship with a department store chain in Brooklyn, New York, called Abraham Strauss. And from that, I ended up going to work for Bloomingdale's in New York when I finished my MBA, which at the time was the leading department store in the world. And that was great experience. But I still was interested in doing something other than that. And using my massive 1 year of retail experience, I managed to talk my way into one of the big international management consulting firms as a retail strategy expert. And in those days, I'm talking now mid to late 70s, strategy as a consulting discipline was relatively new. And we were learning and to a certain extent making it up as we went along. And so it was a great time to get involved. And I worked on a range of clients, not just retailers, but when there was a retail client around the world, because of my background, I would end up being involved in that, which is what brought me to South Africa. So I joined one of the very large fashion retail specialty store chains here, as I said, as their marketing director. The main purpose of that was to implement a strategy we had developed. This was a listed company, but it was still a family-controlled business, and the founder was looking to exit. And it was realized that the business probably wasn't robust enough to stand on its own. So we felt that finding another big retail chain as a merger partner made sense. And we identified, I don't know if you're familiar with Marks and Spencer in the UK and Europe, which at that time was the leading retailer in Europe. They were then just a textile business. They had not moved into things like food retailing, which they do now. They had a business, well, not Marks and Spencer itself, but family of the people who were the founders of Marks and Spencer had started a similar business in South Africa called Woolworths, which has nothing to do with the American Woolworths. And they basically modeled themselves and copied what Marks and Spencer was doing. And we identified them as an ideal merger partner. The merger happened, and then I was seconded to Woolworths as their head of strategy, which was very exciting because they were then considering getting into food retailing. So I was very involved in a project that brought them into food retailing. And at the end of my contract with them, I decided I wanted to stay in South Africa for a few more years. I was having fun. And I also wanted to have my own business. So I left the retail world and I saw the opportunity based on my marketing experience to start what you would call a through the line communications agency. In other words, a communications agency that did traditional media advertising, direct response, promotions, PR on an integrated basis under one roof. And it was very successful. To the extent that one of the large international, multinational advertising chains now called, or advertising groups now called JWT, back then J. Walter Thompson, took an interest in the business. They bought a small stake, which became a larger stake, which became a controlling stake. And after a few years, they eventually bought me out entirely, took the brand elsewhere in the world. My business was called Enterprise. And I became the CEO of JWT in South Africa. And that was a business that had been around for many, many years, but was in trouble and technically insolvent. So I was faced with a whole new set of business challenges to learn from. And we managed to turn that business around successfully. And I was then subsequently offered the job running JWT Canada, which was a much bigger office. And that was my, if you want to call it, Damascus Road moment, where I decided that what I wanted to do in my life was actually stay in South Africa and be self-employed. I didn't want to go into a big international corporate. So I left JWT. I started with three partners, what was initially an advertising agency, which grew into, by the mid-90s, the largest independent, in other words, not internationally affiliated advertising agency in South Africa, and subsequently expanded into other marketing services as well. And then in the late 90s, we got bought out by a group of business services that were looking to list, and they were buying businesses to bulk up for the purposes of a listing. And we were bought a year later. The listing happened. Just before the listing, the company lost its CEO. So they approached me and said, "Don't I want to be the CEO?" And at that time, I thought, well, I've never had a failure in my life. Everything I've done has been successful. I can do anything. So I became the CEO of a listed group, and I had probably the three most miserable years of my life because I really got into something that I hadn't bothered to understand in advance. And as I began to understand it, I realized that this was a business that was poorly constructed. The component parts, some of them were completely broken. They didn't fit together. And I spent 3 very unhappy years basically unbundling that, and successfully. At the end, we sold off all the businesses. We sold the listed shell. And this was end of 2001, beginning of 2002. So now I've got to decide, what do I do for the rest of my life? And I thought, no, I'm not going to go back into another big business. I'm going to work for myself. So since then, what I've been doing is a range of things because I have a short attention span. I do consulting as a one-man band for businesses on business strategy and business development. I work for some as a kind of part-time outsourced marketing director. But I also have my own business interests in various fields, ranging from over the years from insurance to tourism It's not just things like marketing communications and so on and so forth. And as I've gotten older, I mean, I'm 69 now. What I've been doing more and more is basically working more hands on with younger entrepreneurs, typically startups or early stage businesses, using my experience and knowledge to help them get going. And I work with them either as a strategic advisor or non-executive director. I'm the chairman of a small technology business that's a startup in the UK, and I'm enjoying myself because I get to do a lot of different things, which appeals to my ability to focus for too long on only one thing. And in between, I get to indulge my other personal interests. So, I mean, I mentioned to you up front, I run. Maybe not as much as I used to at my age, but I've done over 150 standard and ultra marathons. Today, I do a lot of trail runs. And I also am passionate about trekking and climbing. I've done many trips throughout Africa, and I go regularly to Nepal. In fact, how I got involved in the show is you interviewed a guy named Jeff Raisley a while back. Jeff and I were at in college together and played rugby together 50 years ago. And we both share a passion for Nepal, and we've been to Nepal several times together. And I've continued doing that. So, that's so, it's a lot of different things. And this is a very long answer, but hopefully that tells you who I am.
Yes, also a very good answer as well. I learned quite a bit about you through that full explanation, and I didn't even know you were in areas such as tourism as well.
Mm-hmm.
And are these tourism aspects kind of focused around South Africa, or how does
Well,
that?
my largest single failure, I'll put it that way, as an entrepreneur was in the late 90s. I was an investor and founder of what would have been a successful business that was opening a portfolio of developing and opening a portfolio of specialist lodges in East Africa.
Mm,
We have a lot of tourism into Africa that's built around game viewing, and that's fantastic. But there's so many other things here. For example, Nemba Island, Pemba Island, sorry, which is the northern island in the Zanzibar archipelago, has some of the best five-star diving in the flat waters behind the coral overburden off the islands. You have, in addition, in some of the game reserves there, a lot of history. For example, in the Sulu, there were important battles fought during World War I between the British and the Germans in Africa. You have historical and cultural tourism in that part of the world. And we had put together a portfolio of lodges that addressed multiple different interests, and we had significant backing around them. We had our environmental impact assessments done and approved. We had our social impact assessments done and approved. And we were in the middle of fundraising when 9/11 happened. And what happened at that time was the investors, who were primarily American, ran scared and pulled out. And consequently, we would have had to go back to square one and start over again. And in the end, we simply sold on the idea to an established tourism group who have done some of that development themselves. So yeah, that was one example in tourism, and it also shows, when you're a serial entrepreneur, you're not going to have a success every single time, and you need to learn from your failures as well as you learn from your successes for the next time down the road, because the objective is to win more than you lose.
So, what are the three most important habits to have in order to become a successful entrepreneur?
Okay, that's an interesting question, and I'm going to probably rabbit a bit because I haven't actually thought about that as such. But the first quality that makes for a successful entrepreneur is a strange one, is that you have to understand risk, but you can't be afraid of taking risk. And those two things don't typically happen together. Any new business startup is risky. Most new businesses fail. I mean, that's a fact of life. Anytime you start a business, the chances of success are smaller than the chances of failure. Okay. And the more people understand risk, the more they are unlikely to take risk. A lot of successful entrepreneurs bluntly are lucky. They didn't understand the risk. They went and did it and it worked. Great. But if you really want to do the job properly and on a sustainable basis and maximize your chances for success, you need to understand the risks. But at the same time, you need the temperament to accept risk. And not everybody has that. People think they have it. I mean, I'll give you an example. It's not directly related to this, but how people, even at senior levels, can be risk averse and not realize it. When I had my advertising agency in the 90s, that, as I told you, became very successful, I had a management team, in addition to my partners, who formed our EXCO, our executive committee. And they were very interested in becoming shareholders in the business. Okay. And what I realized in talking to them was that they didn't really understand that equity ownership in a business comes with potential rewards, but it also comes with risks, responsibilities, and potential costs. And the way I addressed it was to say, before we even talk about equity, let's just talk about your remuneration. I'm going to give you an option. And there were 8 people involved in this. Option 1 is you get a 5% salary increase next year on what you have now. Okay. Option 2 is you get no salary increase, but if we achieve certain milestones, I'm going to give you much more than 5%. And there was a strategy for that. Option 3 was you take a reduction in salary of 10%, and the kickers ratchet up considerably more. I expected when I did that I'd get a few of each. Everybody but one took the 5% safe increase. And that in and of itself is a lesson. It doesn't mean that they're bad people, and they were certainly great members of the team, but none of them would have been an entrepreneur or success, because they wouldn't have been risk takers. So that's number one, is understanding risk and accepting risk. And also knowing when not to accept risk if you understand risk, because, risk is risky. The second quality, and in fact, this one I'm going to unpack for you. It's going to take so much time. Let's make this 2 and 3 together. Okay. Most entrepreneurs, and in fact, most businesses in general, don't really understand that to make money, and the only reason you go into business ultimately is to make money. Okay. To make money means owning something, but to own something, you got to give everything else up. You can't be the best at everything. And to be a dabbler, a jack of all trades, master of none, is a recipe for failure. I mentioned that I worked for Bloomingdale's. Now, Bloomingdale's is about the last man standing in the department store business. Now, when I went into retailing in the late 70s, the fashion world was dominated, not just in America, but here in South Africa and elsewhere, by department stores. Okay? They were convenient, one-stop shopping. They had great brands and so on and so forth. Where are they today? If department stores collectively have double-digit market share, I'd be very surprised in the fashion world. I'm sure it's under that. What's happened? What happened was they got taken out by people that owned something. They were either better at a specialty line of product, or better at price, or better at convenience, like online retailing, or a mall, which is kind of a department store with multiple owners. There were many different formats in retailing that did a better job in one aspect, whereas department stores were jacks of all trade and masters of none. Now, people in all businesses face this dilemma. They don't know what to give up. So what I think I've understood through the work I've done over the years is that it starts by having a basic strategy, but it doesn't end with the strategy. The basic strategy up front, very simply, is having a product or service that satisfies a customer's needs. So he wants to buy it. He's able to buy it in the sense that he can afford it. He feels that the price is fair for it. And he's able to access it. In other words, you might want a Mercedes, but if you can't afford one, you can't have one. And if you can't afford one and there isn't a dealership anywhere near you, you can't have one anyway. And just because you have a lot of money doesn't mean you want a Mercedes. Okay, so demographics don't determine the need. But to have a market, you need all three things. You have to have the need with a product or service that can satisfy the need in a plausibly different way. You have to have a customer who is ready, willing, and able to access that product. They can get to it and they can pay for it. Those three boxes, you've got a market, and therefore you've got a strategy. It's amazing how many businesses don't even have that, particularly early on. A lot of business you discover when you get into them, and it's particularly rampant in tech-oriented businesses, but not exclusive to them, is that they have an app or a whatever that does what they say it does. It works, but nobody wants it. There's solutions in search of problems. So let's just assume you've ticked the box. You've got a strategy. That doesn't determine whether you're going to make money. Whether you make money or not depends on what you invest in and don't invest in the execution of that strategy. Okay? And the problem, very simply, is that nobody has deep pockets. Even the biggest companies in the world, and Apple, don't have the deepest pockets to be able to do everything. So you have to do a few things well and not waste time, money, and effort on the things that you don't do well. Let somebody else have those things. You own something, you have to give up other things to own that. Now, there's only three things ultimately that you can own. And these are things that every business has already made decisions about. But so they think they've done the job. But what they don't realize is that they have to have one of these things driving and the other two following. And these three things are, first, your product or service, what you sell, okay? And how you limit, define, and invest in that. And I'll elaborate on this point. The second thing is your platform. And by that, I mean how you do business. Doesn't matter really what you're selling, but how you sell, how you service, how you distribute, how you fulfill, that's your platform, okay? And the third issue is who you sell to, the class of customer, because not everybody is going to be your customer. And as I said, all businesses have taken limiting decisions on all three. Nobody sells all products in all ways to all people. But to make money, you have to understand and have the guts to stand by your decision to back one of those three as the driver, and only one. And I'll explain why. Let's say you decide you want your product to drive, your product or service, okay? What that means is that the reason customers are coming to do business with you is because you have a product or service that they can't get from anybody else. They think your product or service will satisfy their need in a way that's different from anybody else. And if they want that, you're the only game in town, okay? Now, the starting point for such a strategy, or the execution of such a strategy, is that you actually have such a product or service. And not just once, always. Okay? So, relative to any other type of strategy, if you're going to follow that road, you have to invest always disproportionately in product development. In many other strategies, you can access your product from anywhere. But in this case, it's got to be your product. And you always have to be releasing the new improved version of it. Otherwise, someone else is going to come along and beat you at that product game. Okay? So if you're doing that, what you don't want to do is dissipate your investment in product or service development. So you don't back 1,000 products and end up with 1,000 Me Too's. You put your money behind one idea, typically, one product, maybe a few variants around it. I mentioned Apple before. Apple's a classic example of that kind of company. At times, that's the biggest company in the world in terms of market capitalization. How many products does it really have? I mean, we can argue whether a phone and a laptop are two different products. You could say it's one fundamental technology applied different ways, but they really only have one or very few things to sell. Everything is a size and spec variant on that base. Okay. Biggest company in the world has one thing to sell. Okay. Coca-Cola as a brand, I know it's part of a bigger company, has one thing to sell, Coca-Cola. All right. There are not many companies like that, but the ones that are there are quite obvious. So here's your dilemma. If you only have one thing to sell and you are investing continuously in improving and the iPhone 13, 14, and so on and so forth, in order to stay at the leading edge, how do you make money? You only have one thing to sell. The profit formula for that kind of business, whether you're Apple size or a startup, is volume. So even when you're starting a business, if that's the road you're going down, you have to be thinking in terms of maximizing volume from day one. And that's not true in every business. I'll come to that. All right. And that requires two things. First, it requires that you proliferate your distribution, because you need to reach as many potential customers as possible, because people are only going to buy one. Okay. If they like it, they might come back and buy it again, but there's nothing else they can buy from you. So your marketing and business development strategy is entirely focused on finding new customers. Those are the first kinds of companies that look at new geographies. They go international. Those are the first companies that look to open up new distribution channels, selling on different platforms. It's in retail, it's online. We have different strategies for different types of retailers and so on and so forth, because it's about reaching more and more customers. And the second thing they do is they need to ensure that they're always the least cost provider of whatever the product or service is. Because if someone can copy their product or service at a lower cost, they're dead. Now, you read a lot of business literature says you should be the low cost provider. It's always nice, but only in this type of strategy is it essential, because that's your Achilles heel. If someone can do it cheaper than you, you're dead. Okay. So this kind of company, in addition to investing in the product development, they also have to invest in engineering the supply of that product in such a way so that they can be the least cost provider. And again, volume comes into this, because scale has a direct impact on cost. So even if you're starting out, you have to think in terms of scale if you want to play that game and win. Now, that's a very different game, for example, than the second type of strategy, which I talked about, which is where you're differentiated by your platform. In other words, not what you sell, but how you sell, how you distribute, how you fulfill, and so on and so forth. Okay. Take two companies. We've mentioned Apple. Apple sells a laptop. So does Dell. But Dell and Apple are fundamentally different businesses for precisely that reason. Dell isn't differentiated by a unique product. Nobody says, I have to have a Dell. It's so much different than any other laptop. It's a generic laptop. It might be a very good one, but it's a generic laptop. So how does Dell succeed? Very differently than how Apple succeeds. Dell, when you think about it, is a platform company, and its platform is about logistics. Okay? They don't care how you order the laptop. What they realized, let me just scroll back a second. What they realized is that the problem in buying a laptop is that, and I've got the sun coming through. Can I just get up for a second to close the curtain?
Yeah,
Because I've got,
it's fine.
yeah, because I've got the
You're
sun
doing
right.
great. Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully you can see me better and I can see you better now.
No, and you're breaking down some great points. I think the first one you mentioned was take massive risk, or maybe don't be afraid to take risk. And then the next thing you
But
were saying
understand the
was
risks you're taking. Yeah. And the second one is understand how you're going to make money. That's what we're on now. And how
yeah.
you're not going to make money, because that's equally important. The most important decisions you take in strategy aren't what you're going to do. It's what you're not going to do, what you're prepared to,
Mm,
if there's an opportunity to make money. And that's what I was getting at here. Adele realized that in their business, the limiting factor for the customer was that if you want a laptop, you want it spec'd in a particular way. You want this driver and that software, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you're unlikely to just find it on the shelf exactly as you want it. So you're going to wait for it. So what they did was engineer a platform that does that as seamlessly and cost effectively as possible. As I said, it's actually a logistics company. Nobody in Dell actually even touches the laptop. They take the order any way you want to order it. You can order it on the app. You can order it online. You can call a call center. You could probably drive past their offices and throw an order on a cleft stick through the window. They'll take the order. Okay. They then manufacture the product on an outsourced basis through a network of factories they don't own. Because why do you want to own the factory when you don't know in advance what you're going to manufacture? You can't make money doing that way. Okay. So they move the business around according to the company that can deliver that laptop that's needed the quickest and the cheapest. Okay. And then they deliver it to you in the way that makes the most sense. So if a particular courier company are the best in this town, that's who they use. In that town, that's who they use. So as I said, nobody actually touches the laptop. Their whole business is about managing the logistics. Okay. But it sells a laptop, but it's a platform business about managing how you order, how they outsource manufacture, how they deliver to you, and so on and so forth. So, whereas in the product business that we talked about first, the Apple, it's a volume game and it's about finding new customers because that's everything that matters and how you have to do that. This business, your volume is constrained by the capacity of your platform. You can invest and ratchet up your platform, but it's not a line like this. It ratchets up. So the profit formula in this type of business is about maximizing the utilization of your platform, okay? And also maximizing the operational efficiency of the platform, bringing down the cost. All the work goes into engineering the platform. It doesn't matter where the product comes from. You can put anything on that platform that fits, okay? And it doesn't matter who you're selling to, so long as they can access the platform. The whole business is about ensuring that that platform is fully utilized and highly efficient. In one of my insurance businesses, we use a call center. But that call center, because of the type of business it is, only operates Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. I can't be a platform business because I'm not fully utilizing the call center. It's an expense in my business. It's not a profit center. It's a necessary thing to have, but I'm not going to make money out of it. Okay. I either have to eat the expense or I'll outsource to somebody else who can do it cheaper. Okay. It's not my business, even though we have a call center. But there are businesses that the business itself is the call center. And that's a platform business. Now, the similarity between the first and second strategy, the product and the platform, is that they're both transactional. There's a margin on each transaction. Okay. The third one is very different, and that's a class of customer strategy. Now, as I mentioned before, nobody sells all products in all ways to all people. But only in some strategies does ownership of a particular class of customer actually define your business. Now, I'll give you an example. You won't know the company, but here in South Africa, there's a particular insurance company that only sells to degreed professionals. Their clients are doctors, lawyers, engineers, accountants, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, South Africa is a country of 60 million people. I don't know how many degreed professionals are. Let's say there's 500,000. Okay. Why would a business deliberately set out to only serve less than 1% of potential customers? The answer is that can be a very lucrative strategy so long as you understand what that type of strategy entails. And it entails owning that class of customer. Okay. And so your IP, if you like, isn't in your product development, or it isn't in the efficiency of your platform. Your IP, your intellectual property, is in your deeper insight into those needs of your class of customer that you're looking to serve, so that you can serve them in many ways better than anybody else. So you set out to own that class. By definition, this is not a volume game because your volume is finite. If there's only 500,000 or whatever degreed professionals in South Africa, you can't have 500,001 customers. It just doesn't exist. So your objective is to own as much of that 500,000 for as long as you can. So what does this company do? Well, they look to recruit you before you become a degreed professional while you're studying on the university campuses. And they do it in a very clever way. What they do is they give people studying for a degree, a professional degree, a life insurance policy. They give it to them. Not a lot of students die. Some do, but very few. That's their marketing expense, because what they have as a result is the goodwill of the customer and permission to market to them ongoing. And then the strategy for that kind of business is for the rest of that customer's life is to incrementally upsell them into higher and higher value products, cross-sell them into more and more products. And in that business, where in the first business, new customers are everything, here, your existing customers are everything. And you'll probably, in this kind of business, require what is called a loyalty program. Now, there's no point in having a loyalty program when you only have one thing to sell. Loyalty is simply a function of the customer liking the product. If they like it, they'll come back again. If they don't like it, you can't bribe them into buying it. But in this kind of strategy, ensuring the customer stays with you for their lifetime is fundamentally important. Because if you lose one, there's not many more to replace them with. So it's not transactional like in the first two strategies. It's about maximizing the lifetime value of that relationship that you have with the customer. And that generally involves swings and roundabouts. There are times where you're prepared to take a small loss in order to make a bigger win later down. Okay. And so on and so forth. So the point I'm making is when you're starting a business and you have no business, anything that makes money looks attractive. I remember when we started our advertising agency, we'd left a big multinational advertising agency, JWT. We had big multinational clients. And we thought we were the best. So we felt there was no reason why we shouldn't also focus on going for big corporate advertising clients. We felt that we had advantages, for example, in our marketing and strategy insight, that we could offer clients to get them to come to us. So the first day, I had 3 partners. We had an office. There were 4 of us sitting around the one table we had. We had one table, 4 chairs. This was before cell phones. We had one telephone sitting in the middle of the table. And we took turns phoning the people we knew in the big companies to make appointments to see them. And as you would expect, we didn't get a hold of a lot of people. We left messages. We got a hold of a couple. We made appointments for the following week or whenever. And now it's kind of lunchtime and we've run out of people to call. And the panic begins to set in. You start asking yourself, should we get the yellow pages? Maybe plumbers need insurance. Now, plumbers aren't big corporates. That wasn't our strategy. Fortunately, we stuck with our strategy. But the temptation in a new business is always, and in any business, but it's particularly profound in new businesses, is to go chasing any possible revenue stream and forget that to own something, you got to give other things up. Otherwise, you end up as a department store, and department stores fail. Okay. Now, so that's my second biggest lesson, but because it's a long one, I'm happy to accept that as 2 and 3 if you've got any other questions in the interest of time.
No. I think you broke down a lot of good points, especially the idea of sort of niching down, focusing on both quantity and quality. And it's really genius because when you niche down, you could really focus on maximizing those counterparts. And your niche, in a way, can essentially become your platform. And you could sort of build that around your platform.
Mhm.
So I think the next thing we get into is, do you think it's sort of a good idea to have a business
Have a bit. Sorry, I missed the question. Have a business what?
have a business
Part.
partner?
Oh, partner. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, that's a hard question. The it's horses for courses. I can name plenty of businesses where there's a sole entrepreneur, owner, entrepreneur, and I can name many businesses that are a collective, that are successful, and I know examples of failures of both. I think it really depends on your own personal style and what you're trying to build. I think you also need to differentiate in a business between the skills you require and how you choose to remunerate those who provide the skills. Now, obviously, you need all the skills that are required in any business, but not every one of those skills needs to come from a shareholder. Okay. A shareholder, keep in mind, shareholding, whether you're providing equity in capital or in sweat, okay, there's an investment. All right. And if we break an investment down to money, the one thing about money is that regardless of how you get money, a dollar is a dollar. A dollar raised in equity or a dollar raised in debt is a dollar. But the way you get money has different costs and obligations attached. When you borrow money to do something, you pay interest. That's the cost. There's a price for the money. But once you've repaid it, there's no further obligation. When you take equity, whether it be in the form of cash or sweat that you convert into cash, okay, there's a recurring obligation because that equity needs to produce onward and onward. And what you would expect for that is a recurring contribution. So if you're bringing in a partner, okay, you expect that partner to make a recurring contribution, and he would expect the same of you, okay, because you're both equity holders in a business, okay. It has to be related to that. If you're not getting it that way, buy it. Like the dollar you bought by borrowing, there's a price. If you need to buy an employee or buy an outsourced service provider to provide something, if that's all you want from them, that's a better way to do it. And it also comes down to style. I mean, some people feel more comfortable with other people around them. Some people don't. I've been in both situations. I kind of like having partners. I've had partners more often than not, but I've also been a solo entrepreneur at times.
Mm.
Another point that comes out of that, which could be, let's call it number 3 in terms of lessons for entrepreneurs. One of the most difficult things to understand when you're an entrepreneur is that you wear more than one hat. Okay. You are an investor in the business, even if it's just sweat equity. You're an investor in the business. You're a director of the business. And you're an employee executive of the business. Now, in big listed group, very few people wear more than one hat. But in a small entrepreneurial business, you're going to wear two, if not three of those hats. And they're fundamentally different, and at times they're at odds with each other. An employee, the chief executive of a business, is employed by the board of directors. His job is to ensure that the strategy is properly implemented, okay, and that the business does what it says it's going to do. It delivers what it says it's going to do. And if he doesn't deliver it, the board of directors will replace it. But in this case, you're also a director, okay? Now, as a director, your responsibility is to the shareholders, okay, to ensure that they're going to see a return on their investment and that the business is compliant. That you're abiding by the laws and rules that apply to running your business, and you have a fiduciary responsibility to do that. But in this case, you're also the investor. And bluntly, an investor is only interested in a return on his investment. He can put his investment anywhere. He's chosen to put his investment with you in your business because he believes that you will give him the return he's looking for at a level of risk he's prepared to accept. But if he doesn't find it from you, he'll move the investment somewhere else. So these things, yes, ideally they work together, and a business functions best, obviously, when they work together. But these things are sometimes at odds with one another. And when you're a small business or a startup, you're wearing all three hats. So you need to, when you're thinking about a problem or an issue in the business, understand which hat you're wearing at the time. When you talk to someone about your business, a customer, an employee, a director, another shareholder, it actually makes sense to tell them up front what hat you're wearing when you speak to them. Okay? And it's confusing. It's hard. I've made plenty of mistakes, and I've thought about this. People that haven't thought about this don't even realize when they're making these mistakes. When you're talking to someone as a fellow executive and he thinks you're talking to him as the owner of the business, it leads to a different dynamic.
And what type of advice would you give to someone who is trying to maybe become an entrepreneur?
Look, the kind of advice is generic advice that goes with most things in life. Is first, think about what you're going to do. Try to understand as best you can what you're getting into, okay? Because if you don't understand the type of business that you want to operate, what your customers' needs are, how things get done, and very importantly, how your competitors do it. Because at the end of the day, you have to take on the competitors. Your job is to take away business from your competitors. And I'm going to come back to that point because I want to make a point there that people might not understand. So first, you need to think it through. Second, you need to, having thought it through, understand the risk and accept the risk. And the risk can be losing your house if you're putting your house up to fund it. If you're not prepared to do it, don't do it, because there's always a chance it won't work. Okay, you have to be able to accept the risks that come with a business. The third thing is that there's no substitute for hard work. There's no easy way. Some people do things easily and they're very lucky. Okay, I've never been lucky. I've been successful and I've had failures, but it's never been because of luck. Sometimes my timing was right or wrong. Maybe that's part of luck. Okay. The fourth thing that you have to understand in your business is that you're going to have highs and lows. And you have to be the kind of person that when you get knocked down, you're prepared to shake it off and get up again. Okay. And you keep getting up until you come to a conclusion. And it's not necessarily a bad conclusion that this thing isn't going to work, in which case you make another plan and you get out. because not everything will work. Most new businesses fail. Okay, so those are all the things that a new entrepreneur has to understand. I just want to come back to the point I made about competition. Okay, people, generally speaking, don't understand always who their competition really is. Okay, a competitor is not necessarily someone that provides the same product or service you do. Maybe they do, but they don't necessarily have to. A competitor is someone who can satisfy the same need for the same customer. Going back to what I said, a market is the satisfaction of a customer's need that they can afford in a way that they can access. Okay, and I'll give you an example. We've already talked about Apple and Dell, both providing laptops. They're not really competitors. The person that wants a Mac will never buy a Dell, and so on and so forth. They don't really compete with each other, even though they're both in the laptop market. The example dates back to my advertising agency. I had the largest confectionery manufacturer in South Africa as a client. They made chocolate products of all types and other confectionery as well. And they competed mainly with the two big international confectionery companies that were then operating in South Africa, which were Cadbury's and Nestle. Okay. And one day I was in a meeting with the CEO of that business, and he asked me, how big is the chocolate market? And I said to him, that's easy. The answer is there is no chocolate market. And he looked at me like I had crawled out of cheese. He said, what are you, nuts? There's us, there's Cadbury's, there's Nestle, and some small players. And I said, no, you're talking about a chocolate industry, not a chocolate market. A market is defined, as I've said, by a customer who has a particular need that you can satisfy. And you compete in many different markets, some with other chocolate and some with other things altogether. For example, part of what they did is what in the industry here, there might be a different term for it in the States, are called count lines. Count lines are the branded wrapped chocolate bars that you find like at the supermarket till, like a Mars bar, that type of thing. Count lines compete with any product that can satisfy a need for you if you're hungry now, because that's what that product is bought for. You buy it for self-consumption. You're going to eat it now, and you're going to feel good having eaten it. And your decision isn't necessarily with other chocolates. It might be with some other chocolates, but there's with anything else that you can eat to satisfy. It might be with pizza. It doesn't matter. That is a competitor to a count line, a slice of pizza. And if you're marketing a count line, knowing that it's about making you feel good, making you less hungry, you focus on things like the product's intrinsics. You talk about the ingredients. You talk about your wafer covered in nougat and the nuts and the chocolate and this and that, and that's how you get the guy hungry. But the competitor may or may not be chocolate. The company also marked boxes of chocolate, individually wrapped, each one different, nice shiny paper, exactly the type of thing I'm talking about.
Yes.
Now, that's also chocolate. That doesn't compete with count lines. And its main competitors aren't necessarily chocolate. Those types of products are very rarely bought for self-consumption. They're bought as gifts. You give a box of chocolate to show somebody you love them, on Valentine's Day or for their birthday and so on and so forth. So those products don't compete with a Mars bar. They compete with roses and greeting cards and things like that. Okay. And the intrinsics really don't matter because bluntly, you're not going to eat the product. Someone else is. The extrinsics matter, the beautiful packaging and that type of thing. Okay. If you don't understand who you compete with, you don't understand how you're going to take business from them. And if you want to grow a business, Yeah, obviously, you'd also like to grow the market. But when you're starting out, it starts by taking business from something else that could, in theory, satisfy the need, even if it isn't a direct competitor in terms of its product format. Okay. And that's one of the other things you need to think through when you start a business is where am I going to get my business? Who is it going to come from?
Okay, that was very, very interesting stuff. And I think that is so important because I think a lot of times when people think of their competitors, they look more so at what the other business is doing and not really what the other business is appeasing to in the market. So
Exactly.
that's really important, for people have that to have that target market awareness. And just to kind of end this off here, this was a very amazing, informative interview. How can we reach out to you?
Well, you have my contact details. Okay. I have limited time. I'm one individual,
Uh,
but I am interested in getting involved in businesses. I'm selective in terms of who I work with. But if people want to contact me, I'm happy to set up a Zoom or Teams meeting to have a discussion and see if there are ways that we can work together. As I mentioned to you, I've recently gotten involved with. I'm based in South Africa, but thanks to technology, I've recently got involved with 4 companies, early stage and startup companies in the UK. And I would love to do it. I'm an American by background. I think the limiting factor only is time zones, but this show shows it works. I'm kind of late afternoon, and you're late morning, but we can still meet and work together when it makes sense. So you have my contact details, and feel free to pass them on to anybody that might be interested. They can email me, and we'll set up a meeting.
all right. Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. This was an amazing interview. I really appreciate you spending your time here.
Pleasure, pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
All right. So, just for a quick little outro here, let's just mention a few things here quickly. LifeWork
Sure.
Systems, this is our affiliate and collaborative partner. If you want to learn about improving your own HR dynamics and your employee structure, reach out to her. She works with businesses that are over 100 or more people. The next thing is going to be our YouTube channel. Please subscribe now. We're growing in subscribers, so keep on doing that so you can get access to more great episodes like this. And then we also are now having a Roku TV channel. This will be on Roku TV as well as our other many different episodes. Next thing is going to be our Ko-fi. We are a crowd-funded show, so please give us a donation and then, support us so you can get more shows like this that don't have ads or any of those other things kind of blocking up the show. And then, the last thing is definitely going to be Jimbo Paris Consulting Services. We have a services business. So if you want to learn how to build a podcast, if you need help building a podcast, reach out to us. And we also have Jimbo Paris Academy as well. So that's where we will teach you for free how to do it yourself. So again, pick one option or the other. We offer quite a bit. Continue watching this show and again, enjoy. I'll see you next time.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to the Jimbo Paris Show.